Abbie Shutro, please stand. Raise your right hand. Do you promise that the testimony you shall give in the case before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
True.
Thank you. Prosecutor, you have 10 minutes to proceed. Please start.
Thank you, clerk. Mr. Abbie Shutro, can you state your name to the court?
My name is Abbie Shutro, and I am 38 years old.
Can you tell about your job? What do you do?
I work at the Shutro Central Police Station as evidence custodian.
So how long have you been working there?
I have been working in the job for 11 years.
So, Abbie Shutro, I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit A for identification. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is this document?
It's a business record relating to change of custody of the evidence.
So, was this chain of custody form kept in the normal course of business?
Yes.
So, was this chain of custody form made at or near the time of the event it records?
Yes.
And was the chain of custody form made by or from information given by a person with knowledge acting in regular course of business?
Yes.
Your Honors, I request to move this chain of custody into the evidence.
Is there any objection?
Yes, objection, Your Honor.
And what is your objection, defense?
The chain of custody has not been established in an in a lawful manner, Your Honor, so it cannot be moved to evidence.
And what do you mean it hasn't been? What can you explain further? Why you think it hasn't been shown?
Yes, Your Honor. The informations are missing from the chain of custody, and we need the defense needs to clarify it in our cause.
Okay. Does the prosecution have a response to this objection?
Your Honors, regarding the chain of custody, I have further questions to ask to Abbie Shutro. So before asking that, I wanted to make sure that we submit the chain of custody as evidence.
Are you going to be asking further questions about the chain of custody form?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, then why don't we defer the objection? Why don't you go ahead and ask the additional questions, and then we can decide if there's an adequate foundation to admit it to evidence. But you may proceed and use the chain of custody form.
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. So, Abbie Shutro,
Yes.
before going to the chain of custody form, can you explain what happened in the police station on March 1st, 2020?
On March 1st, 2020, approximately 11 p.m., Senior Officer String dropped a self-sealed baggie which contained a white powder into the Shutro Central Police Station.
And what happened after that?
After that, I signed and received for the baggie and weighed the baggie. Its weight was 750 grams.
And what happened after that? What did you do?
After that, on April 1, 2020, I sent the evidence to our standard laboratory for testing. The content of the baggie were tested and on April 5, 2020. Then I received the report that the substance was pure cocaine. Then I called Senior Officer String and told him the result.
So, Abbie Shutro, can you tell when did you receive the evidence back from the laboratory?
I received the baggie back from the laboratory on April 10. Then I placed the baggie in an evidence bag and signed my name and added the date and time.
And can you tell in what condition you received the evidence from Officer Strait on March 1st, 2020?
I received the evidence and it was in a self-sealed baggie. There was Officer Pretty initial and detail in the evidence bag. But Officer String forgot to put his initial in the evidence bag. After I remind him, he put his initial in the evidence bag and signed the change of custody form.
So, Officer Abbie Shutro, can you tell about the evidence chain of custody form? Who is responsible to maintain that?
Oh, it's my responsibility to maintain the evidence chains of custody form.
If that's so, can you give the details regarding the missing signature of one of the officer?
Okay. I received the evidence from Officer String. Officer String said that he and Officer Pipi was the primary handler of the evidence, but as Officer Pipi was not present there, Officer Pipi's signature is not there, but as far as I'm concerned, I received it from Officer String and his signature is there.
So, Abbie Shutro, there are two more missing details. What is your explanation to these missing details?
Oh, I don't know exactly how I missed this detail, but this don't mean that the evidence was compromised at any time.
And Abbie Shutro, my last question is, did you know the defendant prior to this incident?
No.
Okay, thank you for cooperating, Abbie Shutro. That would be all your honors. No further questions.
Yeah, but before you finish, there was, I wanted to hear more questions about the form before we ruled on the objection. You had moved to move the chain of custody form into evidence. I guess my question before we turn this over to the defense for cross-examination is, does the defense object to the chain of custody form coming into evidence?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So yeah, so we did not rule on that. We deferred on it. So now that you've heard more testimony, can you explain again the basis that you object to the form coming into evidence?
Again, Your Honor, the chain of custody has not been established in a lawful manner. There is still missing information on it, which Mr. Shutro admitted to in the chief examination.
Okay, so those are issues relating to what's on the form, but in terms of it being a record of the police department, do you have any reason to believe it's not an authentic document?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Yeah, I'm asking, I understand that you take issue with what's in the chain of custody form because it's missing some information. But my question is, do you question whether this is a police business record?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Judges, do you have, we should decide this before we pass the witness to the defense. Do you have thoughts on whether we should or should not admit the chain of custody form into evidence?
I think for the present purpose in deciding whether we admit it for the eventual trial, we should admit it now so that we can hear what the defense has to say.
Okay, I see some heads nodding. So anyone else? It seems like we're probably in agreement there, but anyone else like to weigh in? Okay, I agree with Judge Melody. I think that obviously for for purposes of our being able to make a determination in this pre-trial setting, we're going to need to review the chain of custody document, and we need to hear the defense's cross-examination on the document. So we will admit it for this purpose and for the purpose of this proceeding. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that if the case goes to trial that it would necessarily be admitted there, but for purposes of this proceeding, we will admit the chain of custody document into evidence. So
good morning, Mr. Shutro.
Yeah, good morning.
Mr. Shutro, on March 1st, 2020, Senior Officer Street brought to you the white powder in a self-sealed baggie. Is that correct?
Yes.
The evidence was not in an evidence container. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you put the evidence in an evidence container?
Uh, yes.
You only put it in an evidence bag after you received it back from the laboratory on April 10th, 2020. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Shutro, did you show any concern about the evidence not being in an evidence container when Officer Street brought it to you?
Sorry, repeat again.
Mr. Shutro, did you show any concern when Officer Street brought you the evidence in a self-sealed baggie and not in an evidence container?
Sorry, I repeat again. I cannot hear your voice.
Mr. Shutro, did you show any concern about the evidence not being in an evidence bag when it was brought to you by Officer Street?
No.
No. Mr. Shutro, are you aware of Section 745.05, subsection B, paragraph 1 of Zaltano Criminal Code, which states that the evidence custodian must be able to testify in court as to the condition of the evidence?
Can you repeat again? Because this is the what?
Mr. Shudro, are you aware of Section 745.05, subsection B, which states the evidence custodian must be able to testify in court as to the condition of the evidence?
I cannot understand your what you mean.
Mr. Shudro, are you aware of the Zaltano criminal code rules?
Yes.
Yes. Are you aware of Section 745.05?
Yes.
And according to that, it states that the evidence custodian must be able to testify in court as to the condition of the evidence. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And yet, you showed no concern when the evidence was not brought in an evidence container. Is that correct?
Sorry, what you mean the container? I cannot hear your voice.
Even after you knew about the section 745.05, Mr. Shutro, you showed no concern as to when the evidence was brought to you in a self-sealed baggie and not in an evidence container. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Shutro. You sent out the baggie for testing on April 1st, 2020. Is that correct?
Correct.
And before you sent it out, you weighed the baggie. What weight did you note down, Mr. Shutro?
The weight was 750 grams.
Okay, Mr. Shutro. Mr. Shutro, I'll ask you again. You sent out the evidence baggie after a whole month since you received it?
This is the process is process time is like that. Yeah,
I'm
this
sorry,
this is
Mr. Shutro. I did not get your answer.
Sorry, you repeat again your question.
You sent the baggie for testing a whole month after you received it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And you received the baggie back from the lab on April 10th, 2020?
Yes, it's already.
Okay. Mr. Shutro, did you notice the chain of custody form on the chain of custody form that the time on April 1st, 2020 is missing?
Sorry, repeat again.
Mr. Shutro, did you notice in the chain of custody form that the time on April 1st, 2020 is missing?
Yes.
Yes. And did you also notice that the badge number of Zemagrit is missing?
Yes.
Yes. And it was your responsibility, according to Section 745.05, to maintain the chain of custody. Is that correct? Chain of custody form. Is that correct?
Yeah. Correct.
Yes, Mr. Shutro, you said in your sworn statement and in your chief examination that Officer 5's signature was missing from the evidence chain of custody form. Is that correct?
Sorry. Sorry.
You,
Repeat again.
Mr. Shutro, you mentioned that Officer 5's signature was missing in the evidence chain of custody form. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And you repeatedly asked Officer 5 to sign the form?
Yes.
Yes, so you are saying, was the sign of Officer 5 that important, Mr. Shutro?
Sorry, the what you say the important one? I cannot hear the one.
Was it that important for Officer 5's signature to be on the chain of custody form?
Yes.
Yes, so you are saying that the sign was important, but Officer 5 chose to ignore it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Does the prosecution wish to redirect this witness?
No, Your Honors, no further questions.